Welcome to the Contracting Officer Podcast. It's not just for contracting officers. If you're anywhere in the government acquisition world, this podcast is for you. Today, we're wrapping up a series on proposal writing that we started long ago with Kevin and Vicki Strycharske, one of Skyway's contracting officer consultants. In this episode, Kevin and Vicki talk about how to build a proposal outline and why it's very important to build that outline. All right, here we go.
You and I have been doing this series on the first 4 steps when you see the RFP and you're working out a proposal. And so this is based on our customer has decided to go after an opportunity. We helped them target, we helped them shape it, we've helped them prepare for this opportunity. The team is ready, their team of experts are ready. Our red team review team of former contracting officers is ready, and now the RFPs have finally dropped. So here we go. Okay, we talked about what are the first 4 things that need to be done. First, they read the RFP. That was back in episode 176. And then you actually work on the schedule, lay out the proposal schedule. And that was episode 196, I believe. And we talked about the third piece, which is the proposal kickoff meeting. Is the RFPs dropped? We're building the overall proposal. Let's get started on the right foot. That's the proposal kickoff meeting is for. And now we're going to do the outline. Talk about what is a proposal outline, why it's important, how it works. Okay. So this is the last step in all this prep. Now it's time to really start knocking out the work. And before you knock out the work, though, you got to have an outline. There are 2 things that are critical we're going to talk about today. One, why an outline is so important, why it matters, why you have to have one, or why Vicki and I recommend that you have to have one. And then what does it look like? And what are the key steps in the overall process of building an outline? Before we get to that, I want to stop and say thanks. Thanks this week goes to Leah Heimbach, JC Bott, Matthew Loss, and Laura Reeder from Healthcare Management Solutions. HMS, Healthcare Management Solutions, they combine expertise in IT services, information technology, healthcare services, and clinical compliance for their federal customers. They're headquartered in Fairmont, West Virginia, and they've been podcast listeners for a long time. I want to thank them specifically for sharing our podcast internally with their teams, but also externally with other folks on LinkedIn. In addition to HMS being a longtime Skyway customer, when they take the time to share our content, more people can find it. Because it's customers like Healthcare Management Solutions that allows us to deliver this podcast for free week after week. So thanks to the HMS team. Okay, so back to why this is important, why a proposal outline is important. So why, let me ask you, you haven't gotten to talk yet, right? Why is a proposal outline so important?
It's the goal of the outline to make the proposal easy to evaluate. It's to provide structure. It's to meet the requirements of what the government says that it wants the proposal to look like as far as the instructions. It also covers, what they're going to evaluate, and it also conveys what you are going to do in order to make this contract work.
Is this like a cross-reference index? I mean, those seem like they're sometimes required.
Sometimes they are, especially in the larger, more complex proposals. The agency will ask for the offeror to include a matrix that shows the requirements, and then next to it shows where in the proposal they've actually addressed those particular requirements. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the outline, which you're going to use to put together your proposal in the order in which the instructions ask for. Without an outline, you don't really know where to put your content that you are going to provide to the government. It is a tool that the proposal manager uses to help to keep the proposal development and writing on schedule, to see which pieces are going along fine, but other pieces are dragging behind, and making sure that those pieces don't become a real issue. Keeps it on target and organized, tells the writer what is expected to be addressed in under each of the different headers. And it keeps it within page limits, which is a critical issue. You will often be given any more page limits. For instance, Skyway had a client recently. We had a proposal that was limited to 50 pages, and that seemed like a lot. I was not the manager on this one. And they decided that they would have plenty of room. And so they just started writing. And at the end of the day, when they were all done and just pulling it off of Google Docs, they had over 100 pages, no kidding, for their technical proposal. So they spent the next several days cutting it down to 50 pages to fit within the 50-page limit. So an outline can help you to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So the idea of, I think you call it a budget. So you have a 5 pages for the transition plan and 5 pages for your recruiting model, and like you got to budget out. Is that how you do it?
That's exactly it. Yeah, I will work with the technical guys partly to look at what. First of all, we look at the evaluation criteria to see what is it that the government thinks is most important, and then make sure that we have plenty of pages allocated for that particular topic. And then after that, then you work downwards from the top. And sometimes you end up with only a page for your proposal for your project management plan, for instance. And maybe that's all that you have room for anymore, or you have to adjust some and take a couple of pages back from one of the other different sections. But 50 pages can go pretty quick.
It's like a living guide of how to structure the overall proposal. And you talked about keeping us on schedule, on topic, and within page limits. And so if you don't have a guide, you don't have a living guide, i.e. known as a proposal outline, you are going to find it very difficult to stay on schedule and get it done in 30 days. We talked about the schedule in episode 196. And you're going to drift around and add a whole lot of stuff that may or may not be relevant because I just want to write about how great we are. Well, that's not what they asked for, right? And again, I've done this. And then that page limit, yes, it's 50 pages doesn't sound like a lot until you start to explain all the things you can do to solve all these complex problems, even if it's 5 pages. The number of times that I've been helping, you and I have been working on a couple of projects together, trying to get 6 pages down to 5 or 60 pages down to 50. It's really difficult to subtract and still tell the story. But if you start with that budget in mind, it's just going to work a lot more effectively.
Absolutely will. The outline, of course, forces you to read every piece of the RFP in detail and copy it piece by piece onto a different piece of paper. You will find the conflicting information. It will pop out at you because in one place it'll tell you that they want 20 pages and this other place they'll tell you they want 5 pages. And, just similar things to that. And you note those, and those are the things that you end up having to ask questions about quickly back to the government to get clarification.
And getting clarification is a good segue to our next topic here, which is the idea of a compliance matrix. What's the difference between a proposal outline and a compliance checklist?
Okay. Proposal outline is built to structure how you're going to present the proposal in accordance with the instructions that the government has given you, and in order for the evaluators to be able to find and evaluate what has been presented in the RFP as being important to them. The compliance matrix is built by shredding what some of us call shredding the RFP and going through and breaking it down almost sentence by sentence and checking then against the proposal and finding out whether or not that particular fact, that particular requirement has been addressed, and if so, where within the proposal. So it's a checklist of the RFP that you use to make sure that you've got all of the requirements covered within your proposal.
So a proposal outline is how you map out the plan, and then a compliance checklist is whether or not the plan met the expectation of the RFP.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a huge rabbit trail. We're going to save for a different episode, but I don't want to leave people hanging wondering what the difference is.
Right.
Okay, so let's jump into what is a proposal outline? How does this work? Okay, so the book answer is it's what we call it the framework or structure of the proposal. Okay, it's kind of a roadmap, right? So walk me through how does your system work when you're making these proposal outlines?
Okay, the outline is it helps to give structure, like I've said before, to the proposal and how it's going to look and how it's going to be presented. I start off with, and this is assuming that it's under FAR Part 15. You'll have a section L where the instructions are, and even if you don't, if for instance your RFP does not have a section L, I'm sure there's instructions in there somewhere regarding what do they want to see in the technical proposal if they're going to evaluate the technical proposal. So you look at the instructions and you outline those instructions and lay them out exactly like what the government has indicated that they want in the order that they want them in. So just lay them all out there. And then you go to the, and if you, like I said before, it will tend to pop up whether or not there's conflicting information in the instructions. So make a note of it and don't hesitate to ask questions. Get the clarification before you start down the path or as quickly after you start down the path as you can so that you don't waste time building it in one section and you end up finding out that you really should have done it in a different section. Then you go on to section M, which is your evaluation criteria. And sometimes the evaluation criteria doesn't appear to match the instructions that were given to you for the proposal. So now you're left with, okay, we've got this proposal in this particular structure. Where are we going to address or present this information that the evaluators are clearly looking for and going to be evaluating? So you need to take the evaluation criteria and identify where within your proposal structure you are going to actually address each of the evaluation criteria. Once you have those two done, then you move to your statement of work. Often the way is that the technical folks want to jump on that statement of work and start writing about that. Well, that's nice, except that you still have to fit it into the structure of the proposal, and you still have to give them what they want to evaluate. So we will look at the statement of work next, and you identify within the statement of work all of the different pieces that are in there, and then look at your proposal and say, where does this need to be addressed so that they will be able to evaluate this particular thing. For instance, they may ask for a management plan, but they don't give you a lot of details regarding that management plan, but they do say in the evaluation criteria that they're going to evaluate the numbers and types of individuals that you have on the effort that you've proposed for the effort. Well, that tells you within your management plan, you're going to have a staffing section. And you will need to address that within your management plan. How many people are you going to have? What kind of labor categories? What are they going to do? Maybe if there's key personnel, you identify who those are. So that's the next piece to it, the statement of work.
So at this point, we've got section L, section M, and statement of work. So what the instructions offers, how the evaluation is going to happen, and what this specifically is going to be in this requirement. We talked about the evaluation criteria. Actually, I talked with one of the Skyway team members, with Charlie Hargett, on episode 277. We talked about the importance of the evaluation criteria, how they're built. But that's kind of like, those are the big blocks, the first three of the system that you use, right? So the next three are provisions and clauses, scattered information, I love how you call it that, and then the attachments. So walk us through what's in the provisions and clauses what are the gotchas in there?
Okay, one as a good example in the provisions and clauses that some people overlook. There's actually a clause, for example, for regarding professional compensation. 52222-46, evaluation of compensation for professional employees. So this is really important to most of the service contractors out there who provide professionals like engineers and IT and different categories like that. Sometimes it's just listed in there as one of the clauses, and you overlook seeing the fact that has to be submitted. Your professional compensation plan has to be submitted as part of your proposal. And sometimes they won't even give you instructions as to where to put that. So you can ask them where to put that in the list of questions to ask and say, we see this requires an evaluation of compensation. Where would you like the compensation plan to be submitted? And they'll surprise you. You never know where it's going to end up being. Then there's scattered information in addition, like Section H, special provisions. Fairly often you'll find, for instance, if you're going after an IDIQ contract, they'll tell you in there how they're going to do their task orders, what you can expect to see within a task order request, what you can expect to have to submit in response to that during performance of the contract. They will have in there about background checks. If it's not a DoD contract where you have to have a clearance, then they'll say you have to have a background check. And sometimes that background check is your responsibility, you, the offerer, And you have to address how you're going to get that done. Sometimes it's the government is going to do that. So you will need to address how you'll make sure that all of your candidates will actually be able to get and maintain their background checks. Attachments and exhibits. Don't forget your attachments and exhibits. They are not just decoration. They are intended to convey usually additional information, clarifying information, but more than that, sometimes they will have information that you absolutely need to address in your proposal. For example, within your statement of work, they will probably ask you for a number of deliverables that will be required to be generated and provided over the life of the contract. In one of the attachments, they may tell you exactly the title of those deliverables and when and who to whom they are due. So you will need to have that attachment and need to address that as well. So don't forget to incorporate the requirements of all of your attachments and exhibits as well.
Yeah, it kind of feels like you could have the meat of some of the proposal in those attachments. In fact, I remember a couple of times when I was putting on RFPs that we'd have the statement of work may have been an attachment, right? Because it doesn't actually have to be, but oftentimes it is. But you also have things like, what are the expectations for retention? What is the schematic of the facility you're going to be managing, which is one that I used. So all these different things are attachments. There's a lot of critical stuff in there. So I like how we have these 6 buckets. So section L, which is the instructions. Section M, which is how the evaluation is being done. Statement of work, which is what's the work that's going to be done, and the whole thing. And the 4th thing is provisions and clauses that are actually required in the contract. And like you said, some of those, in fact, I would say a lot of them are going to be in by reference, which means it's just a line out of section I, which is the clauses, or somewhere else in the RFP. It's just going to have a line in the title of the actual clause, which it doesn't tell you all the requirements of it, just gives you a reference to go look it up yourself. And then the 5th thing is, I like how you call it scattered information, because it's the cats and dogs, it's the oddball stuff in there. It's there. Most of it will be in section H, but it's going to be elsewhere. And then, of course, the attachments and exhibits, and that's the 6th item, is be aware that there's meat in them, their attachments. So be paying attention. That's the what of a proposal outline. Let's stop for a second and consider where we are in the acquisition time zones. We are formally in the acquisition time zones. There's no execution time zone topics. For those of you not familiar with the acquisition time zones, they're covered in episode 3. I'll give you the overall detail of them. Where we're living right now, the earliest this would be the market research zone. If there's a draft RFP, you're starting to read through that, starting to build out an overall strategy, maybe having a kickoff meeting, maybe starting to make a draft outline. What we're really talking about here is the RFP zone. Remember, the RFP zone starts when the RFP drops. Well, like we've talked about throughout this series, now these things are now we're playing for real. Now we have to make an actual outline. We have to really have an overall plan of what we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time, because the RFP zone ends when the proposals are due. And at that point, we're in the source selection, and now there's no turning back. Well, there's extremely unlikely chance you're going to have any chance to make any modifications. So during the RFP zone is when all of this stuff is happening. Let's jump over to why the government cares about the proposal outline. I mean, why as a contracting officer, why do I care that there's an outline? Well, fact is, the outline's built from the RFP. So while I may not inherently care that there's a healthy outline, understand it's a result of the RFP that I built. But here's the part I do care about, because the RFP is driving the simplicity or complexity of the proposal and the proposal outline, right? So the harder it is to dissect the RFP and make an outline, the harder it is to write a good proposal. The harder it is to write a good proposal, the harder it's going to be to evaluate. The harder it is to evaluate, the harder it is going to be performed. See my point here? Again, I didn't see this as clearly when I was a contracting officer. It's funny, Vicki, you're nodding your head too, because as a contracting officer yourself, you've been down this road where you thought, wow, I wish I had made that clear. Well, this is a great reason, is to understand that industry is mapping out a plan, to the gnat's eyelash of their outline based on what's in that RFP. And so it's a garbage in, garbage out exercise. If the RFP is not clear, there has to be an outline, but it just won't be a clear one. So keep that in mind on the government side. Is the clearer the RFP is, the better the outline is going to be. Why does industry care? So I'll hand that back to you, Vicki.
I honestly don't know how you do a proposal right without an outline. I do feel that no matter what size the proposal is, as no matter what complexity, unless it's just a straight bid with a quote, with a dollar amount, you're going to have to write something, and you really need to have an outline of what that proposal is going to look like in order to make sure that it captures and presents your information in a way that's meaningful and can be understood clearly by the evaluators. The outline is also a matter of keeping, as you mentioned before, keeping it on schedule, making sure that the writers aren't just writing like crazy and happily writing on their favorite topics, but actually talking about all of the topics that they have to cover. And this is especially critical when you come down to the page limits, because it's so nice to be able to just write and write and write about your favorite topic, but you may have to seriously cut back and look at, okay, what did they actually ask about? And you might have to write some pages about those things that weren't so fun. The outline is often how the work is divided amongst the team as well, especially if you have a number of subcontractors who are participating on it. What I use the outline for is to identify which company, which representative is actually going to be responsible as the writer for that particular section, the subject matter expert, and the volume manager, whoever is in charge of that particular volume, whether it's the management volume or the past performance volume or the technical volume. And sometimes the technical volume even gets broken down into a couple of other pieces as well. That's how I managed to use the outline to manage the whole document as an entirety. When you have like 5 volumes, it's really critical to have a detailed, thorough, complete outline.
Especially when you have multiple players. I like that point of, at the end of the day, we're competing to win. We're putting together a proposal to actually win, right? So in order to get, let's say you have a prime and 4 subs, in order to make each one of those instruments make a song together, right? You have to have a outline. That's. And I'm going to stretch the metaphor here, but you're singing off the same sheet of music. That outline is the sheet of music. Otherwise, You've got the one company saying, "This is why we're awesome." Another company says, "This is why we're awesome," but they don't. They're out of tune. They don't talk to what are we trying to solve, and what we're trying to solve is what's in the RFP.
Exactly.
So that's why I love the simplicity of the idea of create an outline. And I like your point of, even if it's a small opportunity, even if it's 2 FTEs, there's an evaluation criteria. There's some story to this. Even if it's a 3-page proposal, make a bulleted list of what are you going to talk about. Where are the bumpers? Because it's really easy to, I like how you say, write about your favorite topic. It's there are things I could write. A lot of the content I make for this podcast, Paul and I have to cut it down because I could just talk for hours about things like targeting, and I'm probably talking too long about this. But you get the idea. Is it's very easy to write about stuff you're passionate about, and before you know it, you got too much stuff. And so think in terms of, from an industry perspective, how do you use the outline to get the whole team on the same page so you're competing to win? That's the reason we're doing all this, is to be able to deliver a product for the customer. To get to that point, you got to win the opportunity. And this is a really good explanation. I love how you map these things out. So let's speaking of mapping out, we've mapped to the end of our journey here. So the big idea for me is you got to start with a clear objective. Peter Drucker's famous management guru, and that was one of his sayings, is start with clear objectives, because without clear objectives, you can't hire, resource, schedule, plan, or execute. So to me, this proposal outline, that's the clear objective, is to write a winning proposal. Well, how do you do that? Well, you make an outline, because you got to start with a strong and clear proposal outline, because it's critical to having a successful proposal that is actually evaluated and can easily be understood by the government.
That's absolutely correct. The outline really is our roadmap for making sure that it's kind of like the old thing, if you don't know where you're going, you don't know that you actually got there yet. The outline helps with making sure that you address all of the pieces that you need to address. Regardless of the size, all proposals should have some kind of an outline. As a minimum, once you nail down the outline, you don't have to worry about where everything is going to go. You can make adjustments to it as needed. It is a living document. It is not written in concrete. And so you can adjust it as needed, but it will help to make sure that you have gotten everything. The outline helps us to know how big the effort is, how long it will take to write it, who's going to write it. it kind of helps us to get our arms around a very complex document.
And that's what makes this stuff so much fun, because it's never easy. So thanks, Vicki, for being on here. Always enjoy having you on the podcast with me. And for those of you out there, if you need help with proposal outlines, visit skywayacq.com to learn more about our proposal support, and also to see if Vicki is available to help you specifically, because this is her thing.
Thank you very much.
All right. See you, Vicki.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Contracting Officer Podcast. And as Kevin mentioned, when you're looking for help with proposal outlines, call Skyway Acquisition. You can go to skywaymember.com to learn more about how Skyway can help. We'll see you next week.